Our next presentation, by the miracle of modern technology, is taking us round to the other side of the world, or maybe actually just via Rick Paul in Southampton, possibly, I'm not sure. But our next presentation is from Matthew Page, is a senior research fellow in the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine, as I say, at Monash University in Australia. So definitely the best thing from Australia is much better than any kind of like trade deal or something. We're really pleased to have this presentation. Matthew is a senior research fellow, as I say, in the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine at Monash. His research aims to improve the credibility of health and medical research. He's led many studies investigating the transparency, reproducibility and risk of bias in systematic reviews and randomized trials of health intervention, has developed methods to address these issues. He co-led the 2020 update of the PRISMA reporting guideline for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, and was an associate scientific editor for the 2019 edition of the Cochrane Handbook of Systematic Reviews of Interventions. So I say his presentation is going to provide an overview of the PRISMA 2020 statement for systematic reviews, highlighting key innovations in the guidance with particular focus on the updated guidance for reporting the methods and results of the search and selection processes. So hopefully now this presentation will start.
Hi, thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm really sorry I can't be there live, but having discussed timings with Ellie, we realised that the time that would probably be best for you would be right about the time I would be going to sleep. So, seeing as I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. I hope you're all enjoying your summer forum, and today what I want to do is just give a bit of an overview on the PRISMA 2020 statement. And so thanks again to Ellie for inviting me to record this presentation for you. Just to start, I just want to declare that I'm currently supported by an Australian Research Council Discovery Early Career Researcher Award. I do need to declare that I co-led the PRISMA 2020 development group and co-authored the PRISMA search extension, but have no financial conflict of interest in relation to this presentation. I also want to acknowledge Steve McDonald, who helped provide or prepare several of the slides that I'll be presenting. Now, what I want to talk about in this session is to give you a bit of a rationale and the development of PRISMA 2020. That is why we decided to update it and what methods we use to update it. Then I'm going to give you an overview of the PRISMA 2020 statement and accompanying papers. And then I'm going to focus on 4 of the items that I think will be of most relevance to this audience here, those focusing on the search and selection process and results of the search and selection. Just in general, overall rationale for why we need good, clear, transparent, accurate reporting of systematic reviews. Essentially, it's because users of those reviews really need to know what authors did and what they found. So clear reporting of systematic reviews enables others who, if they're interested, to actually replicate the methods that have been reported to see if they've obtained, or see if they can obtain the same result. It also allows users to assess the trustworthiness of the review findings. So rather than just seeing the conclusion of the review, I think that many users would also want to know if it's built on very solid ground and has been used, and rigorous methods have been used to underpin the findings of that review. Clear and complete reporting also enables others to assess the applicability of the findings to their setting. So there is a distinction between reporting and conduct guidelines in that we can have good recommendations on how to do research or do reviews, and things like the Robust tool and the AmStar2 tool enable users to actually appraise the conduct and corresponding risk of bias in the review owing to that conduct. But for now, what I'm talking about is the reporting of methods, which may themselves not have been perfect, but we think that it's still good to have that information reported for users to appraise the review. Now, what does PRISMA stand for? For those of you who don't know, I really liked this explanation from Andrew Booth a few years ago, which is not the accurate answer of what PRISMA actually stands for, but it's a very good attempt, very relevant attempt. So what PRISMA actually stands for is the Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Reviews and Meta-analyses. And so this was a minimum set of 27 items recommended for reporting that was published back in 2009 and has gone on to be very influential, being cited more than 60,000 times by review authors and also by methodologists who have been keen to use the PRISMA statement checklist as a rubric for assessing the reporting of published reviews. PRISMA has also been endorsed by 400 journals and has gone on to stimulate the production of 16 extensions focusing on different elements of the systematic review process or stage of a review. Now, in about 2018, a group of us came together and decided that we thought it was a good time to update PRISMA, given that several changes over the last 10 years had occurred in methods that were available to conduct systematic reviews, with the increasing use of automation tools to help expedite review processes. The introduction of various alternative statistical synthesis methods, and what I mean by alternative is alternative to meta-analysis, and also developments in the risk of bias tools used to appraise studies included in reviews. There are also some changes in terminology and an array of different avenues of disseminating systematic review reports and their materials. So we felt like users today, were perhaps no longer constrained to include everything in a single systematic review report and it's potentially in supplementary files. There are other avenues to making all their information available. We also noted that poor reporting of several items in the original PRISMA statement persisted. And so we thought potentially rearranging the layout and rephrasing some items may enhance their clarity. So we did a couple of steps we used a couple of methods to help inform the update to PRISMA. So we started off by doing a selective review of 60 guidance documents. And so this included the PRISMA checklist from 2009, its explanation and elaboration document, and all of the PRISMA extensions. We then collated other reporting guidelines for systematic reviews as mainly sourced from the Equator Network library. We looked at some conduct manuals for systematic reviews, such as the Cochrane Handbook, and then tools for assessing quality or risk of bias in reviews, such as Robust and AmStar2, and then some tailored checklists that had been developed to evaluate the reporting quality of reviews. And from all these different sources, we essentially collated 221 unique reporting items across all stages of the systematic review. And so pretty much across all of the original PRISMA 2009's 27 items, we found that there was opportunity to add additional guidance or to revise existing guidance for each of the 27 items. Including the existing search and selection items, where we had about 22 potential things to add to PRISMA 2009 as gleaned from these additional reporting guidelines and conduct manuals. So that was our starting point, generating populating a list of possible items to include in PRISMA. And then our next step was to then go and speak to some or contact some methodologists and systematic reviewers and journal editors to get their thoughts on possible introduction of these new items. And so we originally contacted 220 individuals, and these were, as I said, methodologists from a range of different societies for evidence synthesis. And we got about half of them responded. They were based in 22 countries. And we found that about just over 2/3, well, more than 2/3, I should say, had recommended keeping 6 of the existing items as they were, whereas the majority of items were perceived that there was a need to modify them in some way by supplementing them with additional guidance or removing irrelevant guidance. And there was also some support from over 2/3 of the survey respondents for including 5 of 12 potential new items. What was most, I think, valuable and exciting to me when we were doing this project a couple of years ago was that there was a lot of passion amongst the respondents who provided in total 150 pages of free text comments providing their rationale and justification for all their voting in this survey. And that gave us quite a lot of useful data to help guide us forward in terms of deciding what to include in the checklist. And so essentially after the survey in September 2018 in Edinburgh, we held a consensus meeting with 21 attendees from 7 countries in which we presented the data from the literature review and the survey that I just referred to on the previous slide, and then discussed as a full group some possible proposed modifications to the existing 27 items, the addition of possible new items, and dissemination and implementation plans. And so this is a photo of us taken at the meeting in 2018. I still find it quite confronting looking at a photo like that in this day and age. It seems like we should have been a bit more distanced, but then I realized it was a very different time back then. But it was also a very productive meeting. And then subsequent to that, over the next year or so, couple of years, I guess, we initially drafted an initial draft of the checklist, the explanation and elaboration document and flow diagram, and then went through around 6 rounds of feedback with all meeting attendees and some other people who were invited to join the writing team throughout 2019 and 2020. And then by the near final stage of the development, we got some feedback from a convenient sample of 15 review authors, and then uploaded our draft or submitted version of the manuscripts to meta-archive in September 2020, after which we received some feedback from people who'd read the preprint and incorporated that, while also incorporating peer reviewer comments. And then finally in March, 29th of March this year, the PRISMA 2020 papers were published. And so we had a PRISMA 2020 statement paper presenting the main revised checklist, which was co-published in the BMJ, PLOS Medicine, Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, Systematic Reviews, and the International Journal of Surgery. And in addition, we published a corresponding explanation and elaboration document in the BMJ as well. And collectively, since that late March publication, these papers have been accessed more than 125,000 times, which certainly blew my mind. I wasn't really sure what appetite there would be for a new reporting guideline released during this particular time, but it's been nice to have seen the interest in our work and already seeing several citations of the work as well, with about 200 citations of the preprint collected to date and about 40 citations already of the published papers. And so hopefully we hope that it will be useful for authors going forward. So just an overview of PRISMA 2020. Essentially, we have retained 7 sections, or included 7 sections, covering the various sections of a typical manuscript. And across those 7 sections, we have 27 items. Some of them were broken down into sub-items based on survey feedback we found, whereby some items were perceived to be incorporating too many elements, and for those ones it was recommended that we split up into more bite-sized chunks for users to actually fully grasp what we're recommending their report. So some key changes in PRISMA 2020, all of the items have undergone some revision with use of more inclusive wording to account for different methods. So it is still primarily designed for systematic reviews evaluating the effects of interventions, regardless of whether that's trials or non-randomized studies. But we wanted to try and make the wording as inclusive as possible, so that those authors who are doing reviews for which no current PRISMA extension exists could also comfortably use PRISMA 2020 with maybe just some minor tweaks for their type of review. We also reordered some of the items in a way that we think helps improve the flow and the way in which people tend to report the information. And as I mentioned earlier, we split some current long items into sub-items to facilitate their implementation. We've also introduced a small number of new items and substantially revised the explanation and elaboration document with seeking of new examples, and created new PRISMA Flow diagram templates, which I'll come back to show you what these look like in a minute. Also some key changes. We now include in the checklist a more explicit request to report the full search strategies for all databases, registers and websites. We report any use of automation tools at various stages of the review process, such as the search or selection process. And then we included some additional things regarding how outcomes were defined, characteristics and risk of bias among studies contributing to each synthesis, protocol amendments, and conflicts of interest of review authors. Some of which these type of guidance was included in the original explanation and elaboration document in 2009, but we decided to bring them forward and make them front and center in the checklist, assuming people will access the checklist more frequently. We also have some new items relating to the synthesis of results. So asking people to specify criteria and processes used to group studies, methods to prepare data for synthesis, tabulation and visual display methods, and methods of meta-analysis or other statistical synthesis methods. We've also encouraged people to report their methods and results of an assessment of certainty in the body of evidence for an outcome. And also we recommend authors now indicate whether the data, statistical code, and other materials, such as maybe a CSV file containing lists of screened records or screened references, is included as a supplementary file or posted to a repository such as the Open Science Framework. So essentially asking people to make it clear to readers whether this material is publicly available or not. And so the PRISMA statement website has been updated so that essentially on the home page and in all of the existing tabs for the original statement, all of them, those tabs and home page have been updated, so the PRISMA 2020 checklist is pretty much front and center, given that it essentially, it does replace the 2009 statement, and we would be expecting people to be using this 2020 version from now on. So we have a Word version or a PDF version of the checklist, as well as a Shiny app that users who might want to complete a checklist online are able to do that too. The links to the flow diagram templates are also available on the PRISMA statement website in Word version for people to download and reuse. And so this is what the checklist looks like. We've managed to fit it onto 2 pages. And so this is the first half of the checklist covering the title, abstract, introduction, and methods items in the checklist. And then we have the second half of the checklist, moving from the results discussion, and then some other more administrative information. And so again, as per usual, we recommend people indicate the location where each item is reported, and if journals want them to upload this as part of the editorial process, we've made these Word document templates available for people to do that. We've also changed the layout of the explanation and elaboration document substantially, which previous version provided a lot of guidance on what to report, but it was intermingled with evidence on current practices regarding reporting, and as well as some rationale as to why people should do that. Whereas we thought that it might be easier for users if we split all that type of information apart. So we have a separate paragraph explaining why an item should be reported. Then we have a list of reporting recommendations in bullet points. These are essentially meant to supplement what's in the existing checklist. So we very strongly encourage people to not just use the 2-page checklist, but to make reference to the explanation and elaboration document, which includes, for some items, several bullet points listing a possible range of different methods that could be reported depending on which methods were used. So we call these essential or additional reporting elements. And then we include an exemplar to illustrate how to report that item, which has been selected from the published literature. Now I want to just focus on the search and selection process items and go into them in a little bit of detail. Essentially, the first item regarding this process, looking at information sources, is item 6, which now tells authors to specify all databases, registers, websites, organizations, reference lists, and other sources searched or consulted to identify studies, and then also to specify the date when each source was last searched or consulted. And we've recommended this because we think that it will allow readers to assess the completeness and currency of the systematic review, and providing this information should facilitate updating. And so what's new compared to the original 2009 PRISMA statement? There's a more explicit request to report the what and when of each source searched. And so in the explanation and elaboration document, we also subsequently recommend people, for example, when considering just databases alone, to specify not just the database name, but the interface or platform from which it was accessed, as well as the dates of coverage of that database as used in this particular systematic review. In addition, we include an explicit recommendation on what to report for cited or citing reference searches, in that we ask people to specify the bibliographic details of the reports, that is study reports, to which citation searching was applied, the citation index or platform used, and the date when the citation searching was done. There are several other elements that are included in the explanation and elaboration document, but these are just some of the high-level major changes to this particular item. The next item in the checklist, item 7, asks people to present full search strategies for all databases, registers, and websites, including any filters and limits used. So the original PRISMA statement really just asked people to provide at least one search strategy, whereas we've recommend now that that authors provide all search strategies, because I think in the initial days when PRISMA 2009 was released, there might have been a perception that, well, it's quite difficult to ask authors to provide all that extra information given limited space in a journal article, whereas now we think there's so many avenues to make such information available, and making that information available really will help readers be able to detect errors in the searches, and also to reuse those searches in either updates or replications of reviews. Yeah, the things are what's new, just summarizing that again. We want all search strategies, report all search strategies and the search terms used to search any sources other than bibliographic databases, such as trial registers or the web. So not just the full line-by-line search strategy. If they have done a search of, say, Google Scholar or just Google, provide those search terms for us. We also recommend authors provide a description of the search strategy development process, such as text mining tools used to identify keywords, or any processes used to validate, such as capture, recapture, or peer review the search strategies. We also ask people to report if tools were used to automatically translate search strings from one database to another, such as the polyglot search translator, and also to provide a description of the conceptual structure of the search if it's not based on a PICO style approach. And so while the main PRISMA checklist itself just has that first line at the top of this slide, all this additional information is included in the explanation and elaboration document. And there's a few other elements as well recommended for reporting. So it's quite comprehensive, the additional guidance we're providing here. Now, the next item on study selection process, item 8, asks people to specify the methods used to decide whether a study met the inclusion criteria of the review, including how many reviewers screened each record and each report retrieved, whether they've worked independently, and if applicable, details of automation tools used in the process. And essentially, we've providing guidance for different types of scenarios depending on what type of review you've conducted. And so we have guidance for what to report if you've used standard reviewer screening methods, such as just based on two authors are part of the team. Also the use of priority screening based on machine learning. Use of machine learning classifiers as well, and crowdsourcing approaches to help facilitate the screening process. And we include a box within the explanation and elaboration document for PRISMA 2020, which defines all of these different types of study selection methods, and then include guidance on what to report if they have used each of these different types of methods. And so some of the essential elements recommended for reporting in PRISMA 2020 at this stage is how many reviewers screened each record, such as a title and abstract, and each full text report retrieved, whether multiple reviewers worked independently, that is, were unaware of each other's decisions at each stage of screening or not, processes used to resolve disagreements between screeners, any processes used to obtain or confirm relevant information from study investigators, and if abstracts or articles required translation to determine their eligibility, how were these translated? And then that's essentially a guidance regardless of what method has been used. And then we have this additional guidance, for example, if you say you ended up using automation tools in the selection process, where we ask people to report how automation tools were integrated within the overall study selection process. And so if they'd used an externally derived machine learning classifier to provide or reference the URL to the version that was used, and to report the number of records that were eliminated in the PRISMA flow diagram as records marked as ineligible by automation tools. If authors had used internally derived classifiers, we want people to report how they were trained, any validation used, and how they were applied. And if they used some type of priority screening method or software, to specify the software used and provide details of any screening rules applied. So, as I say, a lot more information about, I guess, introducing automation into the systematic review process. And we've, even though it is a nascent approach to systematic reviewing, we felt that it was now a good time to provide some of this guidance, given that we feel like more and more people will be using it in their review. What I haven't mentioned so far is that as in addition to our explanation and elaboration document, as a supplement to the main PRISMA statement paper in the B&J and PLOS Medicine and those other journals, we decided to include what we're calling a PRISMA 2020 expanded checklist, which essentially takes the essential elements recommended for reporting, those bullet points in the explanation and elaboration document, and condenses them all into this expanded checklist. So that users who are wanting to not necessarily see the examples or see the rationale, but just want a one-stop shop place where they can see what's recommended for each element, each checklist item, they can use this expanded checklist. So as you can see here, this is what the elements recommended for reporting are as specified for our items on the information sources, search strategy, and selection process, which goes across another page or so for the selection process, given we provide different possible recommendations depending on what methods we used. And I think that's the whole point we're really wanting to try and emphasize with PRISMA 2020. Some people may look at these checklists and think, oh God, there's so much to report. But the thing is, we know that not everyone will use every single approach and every single method to use to identify studies or select them for inclusion. So we wanted to be comprehensive and include quite a lot of guidance depending on what method was actually used. But for many authors, it might just they might just need to look at the first 2 or 3 dot points for each of these items, and all the other elements in this expanded checklist may not be relevant. So we thought better to be comprehensive in this instance. And then finally, the last item I want to cover is, as relates to the selection process, is the results of the selection process, where for item 16A, we recommend authors describe the results of the search and selection process from the number of records identified in the search to the number of studies included in the review, ideally using a flow diagram. We hope that this will improve replication of reviews if people want to repeat the searches and see if they find the same number of records, and also help particularly librarians estimate the resource requirements for updates of a review. And so what's new in the flow diagram? We essentially ask people to specify the number of records yielded per database, where feasible. I mean, obviously, if there's 16 or 20 databases were consulted, it might be easier to just present the number of records received or retrieved per database in a supplementary file when reporting the search strategies for each of those databases. But if it's feasible, including in flow diagram is a good idea. We also recommend the number of records excluded before screening, such as duplicates that were removed or records removed by machine classifiers. We now ask authors to report the number of reports that were not retrievable, knowing that not everyone is able to access all full text reports that they initially were planning to retrieve. And so sometimes that left a couple of holes in the flow diagram where authors didn't really know where to put that information. It wasn't necessarily an excluded record, it was just a non-retrievable one. We also recommend separation of databases and registers from other sources, a listing of ongoing studies, and a separate box to handle systematic review updates. So this is what the flow diagram looks like. It's quite big, includes a number of different boxes, but the way we recommend authors use it, and when they look at the PRISMA statement website, they'll see that they're able to construct a flow diagram depending on what was actually consulted or what databases or methods were used. So the main key part of the flow diagram is this middle section here, which is quite similar to the original PRISMA statement. Essentially is asking for the flow of records that have been identified via databases and registers. If people also used other methods such as searching websites, organizations, or citation searching, often which comes after the searching of databases, and so it can be a bit difficult to know where to fit that information given it has its own separate flow. then they could use both of these panels. Alternatively, review authors might have only search databases and registers, but they're doing an update of their review. And so they can include this initial box on the left-hand side, which indicates the number of studies that were included in the previous version of the review. And finally, if they ended up doing an updated review which searched multiple sources, then they could also use all three panels. And so we're really interested to see people how they try this out, and looking forward to any feedback on this new approach to recommending the flow diagrams. What we do know is people tend to create their own flow diagrams. So this is, as all things in PRISMA, it's just a recommendation. But as I say, we hope that it will be useful for authors to separate out the flow of records in their review. Now, and just as PRISMA itself has been updated, I was thrilled to see that Andrew Booth has also updated his tweet, now pointing out that PRISMA 2020 equals, please remember I used to have 2020 vision until I screened many articles. So that was is very on the ball there, which we really appreciate. So just some concluding remarks. Implications and opportunities for librarians. Essentially, the purpose of PRISMA 2020 is to ensure transparency and optimal reproducibility of systematic reviews. It's not a tool to guide conduct or to assess the quality of a search, though. There are other tools and checklists available to do that. So PRISMA 2020 sets out information required that should make the process of reporting the search easier. The role of librarians and information specialists is obviously critical to both the conduct of high quality systematic reviews and to their reporting. So we really strongly encourage librarians and information specialists to familiarise themselves with PRISMA 2020 and help authors on their review team to adhere to the recommendations we include for these elements. And obviously we recognise it's important that contribution of librarians is appropriately recognised, ideally via authorship, via their contribution to the review, but we also know some information specialists prefer just to be acknowledged, but at least the acknowledgement is important. And we hope through all of this we lead having your involvement in author systematic reviews. It helps produce much better systematic reviews and more transparent systematic reviews, and better than some examples like this, which are unfortunately still far too common. So this comes from an actual real published review, which after indicating what databases they search, they especially end up just saying the keywords are as follows: COVID-19, gastrointestinal symptoms, and so on. I've never seen "and so on" written in a published systematic review, and I'm glad that Steve came across this example here to illustrate what is definitely not good practice when it comes to reporting the search strategy for a review. So just to sum up, PRISMA 2020 replaces the PRISMA 2009 statement and includes new reporting guidance that reflects advances in methods to identify, select, appraise, and synthesize studies. So please take a look at the PRISMA statement website for latest versions of the word checklists and flow diagrams to download. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your summer forum. Enjoy the weather, which seems to be getting much nicer in the UK compared to down here in Melbourne, where it's much cooler and a bit rainy. So thanks again for the opportunity, and please feel free to contact me at Monash via Monash University if you want further information. Okay.
There was a lot to take in there. First of all, I want to record thanks to Matthew for doing that presentation. It's just a pity he's not here to be able to take live questions, because I think, having watched the chat, that has generated lots of comments about the new statement, but also things that potentially might be lost with the original 2009 one, and there are still elements within that people would want to use, perhaps still with undergrads, for example. But yeah, really interesting. I did put his Twitter handle in, so I think if we send lots of tweets right now, hopefully his phone will wake him up. He'll think it was the alarm going off in Melbourne there, even though the weather does appear to be so poor over there. What a shame.